Lord God, as you granted a vision to Joseph that would change the world, so also that world-changing vision comes to us in worship, in prayer, sometimes in dreams, sometimes through the mutual consolation between people in conversation. May that vision for the world, through the love of Christ, be alive in our worship today and with us throughout this season. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I want to begin my sermon time just quickly by giving you thanks for your prayers and your support during the last couple of weeks. Just a couple of weeks ago, I had a few tears in my retina, and so my vision has just been slowly coming back on my right side. That means, Doug Allen, you're free to doze off. I can't see quite all the way over here during the sermon time. You folks are in trouble, because you I can see. Have you ever heard of a man named Edward Patton? Edward Patton? Or how about his two close friends, Merrill Bubba Knight or William Guest? Three men. Think about those names for a minute and kind of keep them in your mind. Maybe you've heard their names before. I bet most of you have not. Not the three wise men of Bible fame, but three men who are willing to be a part of something in which they did not have to be the sole focus of everyone's attention. And we'll hear more about them at the end of the sermon. We'll do a little reveal. But for now, we want to talk today about someone who is part of the Christmas story, but who rarely gets a lot of press during this season. Today we're going to talk about Joseph. There he is. And when you consider the Christmas story, as told in Matthew's Gospel or in Luke's Gospel, and remember, in Mark's Gospel and in John's Gospel, there's no mention at all of Christmas. But when you get out the crutch at the beginning of December and you put it all out there, there's a lot in the story. Mary is there, and the baby in the manger, of course, and angels and wise men and shepherds and animals. But somewhere, kind of back in the background of that scene, is faithful old Joseph. And I just wonder that if old Joseph stayed in the box that houses the crutch the other 11 months of the year, would it matter? Does Joseph matter? Because we don't often think about Joseph when we think about Christmas. And maybe it's because Joseph is not found in a lot of other places in the Bible story of Jesus' life. Or maybe it's because, despite the long genealogy at the beginning of Matthew, Jesus is not Joseph's son biologically, right? Or maybe it's because of the intimacy of that story of birth, or any birth story where there is mother and there is child. Sometimes there is father there, sort of wondering what his role is. But our God story today brings Joseph right out front and center for us to reflect upon his role in this story. And just as the Christmas story is ready to ramp up, and just as the drama is ready to unfold, there is this hold the phone moment that runs through Joseph. And it's something that a lot of us may not completely understand, because our understanding of engagement in marriage is not the same as it was in the culture in which Joseph and Mary lived. And really the problem is that the word engaged doesn't really define or capture what Mary and Joseph had going on right at that moment. If someone were engaged in our culture today, that engagement could be broken off very informally. Probably not without significant pain, but that engagement could be broken off in an informal way. But the custom for the time in which Joseph and Mary lived was different. There was a two-stage process that was in place. First of all, there was the betrothal. And that was a marriage contract typically arranged between the parents. And oh, by the way, as parents of children in their 20s, I am a fan of arranged marriage. I got a shrug back there for that one. The betrothal was the contract that could only be broken by legal divorce. Okay? And the second step in that process, sometimes as much as a year later, there came the marriage feast in which the groom would take the bride into his home. And here's where the suspense grows in the story, and everything sort of it's a cliffhanger, really. Everything sort of stands to be disrupted at that moment, because this story actually takes place between those two steps in the process. Mary and Joseph are betrothed, but not yet married. They are legally attached to one another. And the process lies then not in the hands of the angels or the shepherds or the wise men or anyone, but Joseph, right in this moment. The culture sort of puts it in front of him. What will he do? Matthew offers a few things to think about through the story of Joseph. First of all, that Joseph is unwilling to expose Mary to public disgrace. You know what? Sinner as I am easy and quick to see the shortcomings of others. I don't know if you have that problem. I do. It's not easy for me to be graceful to others. And it's easy for me to sort of hone in on the failure of others. But we could learn a thing or two from Joseph about grace. Lisa and I were married on December 20th, 1987, so a few days ago we had our anniversary. What a lovely time of year to celebrate an anniversary. The one thing that I remember from the wedding sermon is the preacher said at one point, there may be people who don't think that Christmas is a great time to get married, that it'll get all muddled up with the rest of the season and the holidays. And then he said something to the effect of, people who think that this time of year is not a great time to get married may be the types who think that the goodness of Christmas is something to be left for only 1 month. But Joseph, here is the story of a graceful connection, of an unwillingness to bring shame upon another person. Are we willing to pause before we pass judgment on others? Are we willing to pause and see what God is up to? And to extend the sort of gracefulness of Christmas and the season beyond just 1 month or 1 day. And Joseph experiences a vision. He holds back from dismissing Mary. That's how the culture worked, until God plays God's hand more clearly, right? And God says, she will have a son. You will name him Jesus. He will save his people. Oh, for God to speak so plainly and clearly. Now, we may never have a vision quite like that. We may never have that dream that just locks everything down. But there's something in this season that does touch human hearts and that does open us up to what God is doing. And you know what? It's a visionary experience. Your church has a vision. We have a vision of providing water, clean water for people who do not have access to it, who live far away. We have a vision for providing daily meals for hungry children right here in our own community. A vision of people who are equipped for faith every day in their lives and to reach out in care of God's creation, to reach out to the world in love. We believe in a God who still gives visions and who still calls us gracefully to work with one another. And also, please see in this story, Joseph did as the angel commanded. He was obedient. And yes, I know that sort of language doesn't get a lot of play in our life of faith today. We don't think often or pray often or even preach often about following that vision and about obeying what God is saying. I understand that. It's a pretty important part of the unfolding drama, the salvation of the whole world, the fact that people saw this vision and followed it. So let's reflect on this little part of the story of Joseph and ask, if we were to pause before passing judgment in certain situations, to see what God is up to and to really claim that vision and to follow that vision, how would that change us as a church or as individuals? How would that shape this coming year? I'd be curious to find out. You know, you probably never heard this story before, but every April, the National Football League holds its annual college draft. And every April, men from around the world get the chance, they get drafted and chosen to the opportunity to play football at the highest level. 32 NFL teams, 7 rounds of the draft. If you do the math, that's 224 people who are drafted to be potentially NFL football players. The last guy who is drafted every year, number 224, has a name. You know what they call him? Mr. Irrelevant. They even give him a jersey that says that on the back of his jersey. And they do sort of a celebrity roast for this guy because he's the last one, because he has virtually no shot at making a team roster. But here at the end of Advent, mere hours before Christmas Eve, Joseph does not slide into the background. He is not irrelevant. He is not. And he is Jesus' father in name only, but with a heart of grace toward Mary and an ear to what God is doing. Here is Joseph. And through his faith and the faith of others in this story, the light of the world shines through. So back to the quiz at the top of the sermon. Edward Patton, Merrill Knight, Gerald William Guest. Did we guess the three people who they are? Anyone? Anyone? They're the Pips. Did you know their names? I bet you didn't. You know why? Because the names have never been a part of our vernacular. But the music is known the world over, despite the fact that no one knew their names. They were not irrelevant. And neither is Joseph. And as a matter of fact, it may be one great lesson to be found in this story. The fact that Joseph is not irrelevant, and neither is anyone else. No one is irrelevant. In the eyes of the Creator, there are no background singers in this story of God's love and grace for this world. Christ is born. He enters the human story to live and die for you and to be raised for you so that no one would be irrelevant. As a matter of fact, the entire Christmas story is peopled by nobodies. By a humble carpenter and a young mother, and Elizabeth who was barren, and Zechariah who was struck mute before the Lord, and shepherds and foreigners. But they're not nobodies. They're not irrelevant, none of them. And neither are you. You know, there are a lot of Christmas carols that mention Mary. What child is this? In a little town, and Hark the Herald, and Silent Night. We'll probably sing them all. Aren't you looking forward to it? To sing all those songs? But not many songs that mention Joseph. So today, as our hymn of the day, we're going to sing a song that was written by our good friend, Pastor Dave Nelson, who's pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Annandale. Good friend to us, a mentor for many years. A special song to the tune of Away in a Manger. But in the end, this really isn't about Joseph, right? It's not about Mary. It's not about their gender roles. It's not about the work of the shepherds or the race of the wise men. But this season is about God entering our story and inviting us into God's story so that the grace with which we treat each other and the vision that God has for this world and the following of that vision would change our lives. Please stand as you are able, and we'll sing a song for Joseph to the tune of Away in a Manger.